Okay, so the floating island that you sent me, how old is this?
38 December last year, 2016. Do we say that? Okay.
Okay, yeah. So, do you think you could do this better today than you did it a year ago?
I think, yes, I would probably do some things different, but the most, the biggest part is that I'm mainly 90% doing some technical stuff. And this is very organic and, well, it should be food. So it's the opposite of what I do normally.
Mm-hmm.
This is a hard step for me. You see my reference pictures. My main idea was when you Google for floating islands,
Mm-hmm.
it's not only an fantasy island that floats through the air,
Mm-hmm.
it's also a desert. And I wanted a mixture of those. I wanted the desert. You see one picture with this kind of boat swimming and this sugar caramel seagull, yeah.
Yep.
And I wanted to adapt this floating island with some kind of this volcano thing,
Mm-hmm.
and this in this kind of island style, which represents the yeah, what is the word for Schlagobers? Yeah, this this white thing.
It's
Yeah,
like whipped cream.
whipped cream. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, and I really like the style of, yeah, the last picture.
Mm-hmm.
This exactly this one. This is the look how I wanted to look my whipped cream,
Mm-hmm.
the look I wanted for my vanilla sauce, and this very crunchy, crispy, glossy style for my caramel flakes. This kind of, yeah, whatever it is, cornflakes with caramel nuts, caramel nuts or something.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Because for me it was a bit hard to distinguish what the materials should be in the real world. So I went with something that I did, but we can work on this in the direction that you wanted to go. But let's start with yours. So you're aware of what the deficiencies here are, right?
um,
Like if I asked you what is wrong with this picture in comparison to your reference that you wanted to achieve, you could
okay.
point out specifically what the problems are, right?
Yes, I think I can say what's wrong. It's totally not the look that I want. That I wanted, and but the problem is, I haven't played around now again, but I'm not sure if I can achieve that really realistic, the kind of look that you just want to eat it right away.
Mm-hmm. But like I'd like you to specifically tell me what
Oh,
is so we it's just a mental exercise
yeah.
because I think, or that's how I approach when I design, and especially when I try to replicate reality and make something realistic. For me, it's about observation.
Mhm.
So when I compare of what I achieved in the program and what I had as a reference picture, I need to find the small details that I did not manage to reproduce, and it's just the point of observation. So tell me, in your opinion, what you're seeing, what the deficiencies of your image are in comparison to the floating island.
So yes, if I would see this on the internet, I see that the flakes have too less gloss on it. They are not reflecting the light in any way, like we see in the reference. Also the whipped cream. On the picture it has more gloss. It's not that hard, shiny gloss like on the flakes, but it also has more gloss on it, more reflection. The same as with the sauce. I think it's too flat. That's the first point. Maybe I think vanilla sauce is flat, but it has more thick. So what's the word for the consistency? So maybe there could be a little bit noise or something. Just that less that you can hardly get it, but a little bit maybe. And for the cream, yeah, I think the general idea by modeling those whip towers, the small, the orby things, the general idea was with this, how is it called, the modifier, it's the, I have activated it, it's the kind of, where is it?
Array or subsurf?
It was a kind of wave, but not a wave. It's a kind of. Isn't there a modifier for? No, I know. It was the proportional editing with the top point activated and just rotating, and so the rotation is activated for the whole object. And so it gets this spinning effect you see in the picture. But yeah, I think the idea is right, but there must be a little hint to get it more like on the picture. And also there are some imperfections. Maybe they could be done with, I don't know, with matte painting, with some distortion maps, maybe. Yeah. I think that's it for the first few. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'll go through. I'll remove the lines here. I'll go through what I see when I'm looking at this, and I'll put the put this on the side just as a reference, real small. So first thing for me is when you're looking at the reference image, the sauce and everything that is liquid generally has this small convex shape here that goes into the object that's floating on it. So for your image, everything is cut off, like it's a flat surface. So that needs improvement, because it's a very important detail on how liquids behave. Second, when you look at the consistency of it, the liquid has a different amount of transmission of light when it's thick and when it's going up on something. So it has like a almost like a gradient effect. You see what I mean, right?
Yeah.
It's thinner here, so it lets more. It's more transparent than here, right?
This effect goes hand in hand with the last thing you mentioned, right? It's
yes.
Yeah.
So this is one thing. The second thing, when you look at, by the way, this isn't cream. This is in English it's called meringue or meringue. It's like a sugar top. Let me show you what I mean by that. So that's why I wasn't entirely sure which material to go for exactly, because this one's hard, and what you said with whipped cream is soft, right? It's looks a bit different. This is a hard shell. If we look at this,
yeah, I know what you mean now, but yeah, I'm not a desert specialist, so
yeah, but I went, so because when I show you what how I did this, how I did the material, I went for this, so there's no confusion that I didn't try and recreate whipped cream. So this is a hard shell. It's porous on the inside, so it transmits light from the back as well. And it's not liquid, so it doesn't have that much glossy reflection. Like it has a little bit around here. But mostly it's porous, rough, diffuse, and that's how I would describe the shell of it. Actually, let me save this image to the folder. But even looking at your reference, your material isn't as glossy as this. It has reflections, it has a roughness to it. It has like this porous stuff here that I don't see anywhere on your picture. Your picture is largely flat. It has diffuse color with bump, but it doesn't create these highlights like these. So that's
what I mentioned with the glass.
Yeah. So this is another thing. Second, this entire mesh, how you created it, it's supposed to be also some kind of caramel sauce, right?
Yeah.
So it's also a liquid. It should behave in a very similar way to this custard, that's how it's called, down here. And so you have another reference, which is this for the caramel sauce. Right? And you can see the transmission is also different. So it's darker when it's thicker, and it's lighter when it's not as thick. So this is something to look at when trying to realistically recreate it. When it's thicker and it's like pooling into something, it becomes dark. And when it's really thinly spread out on something, it becomes really light and yellowish. Okay. Generally, when I looked at the file, all of these tops, so all of these, are exactly the same. They don't have any variation. That's not how real life works, because you use an array modifier to put them like around this floating island, this volcano, and they copy the geometry. So they have no variance. That's why it looks unrealistic, because you can tell they all face the same direction because it's an array modifier. So everything is put into this direction when you look at the top. And that's why you have trouble with that. And second, if you were going for whipped cream, and generally the bump on these, so the roughness on these, is too large in comparison to the size of the object. If you look at this, the size here is tiny. They're really, really tiny, like imperfections and rough bumps, instead of what you have in yours, where it's like really large. So the noise modifier needed to have been a lot smaller. I think this is mostly it for just the whipped cream and the sauce. I didn't really know what you wanted to go for with this tree, so I don't know how to describe it, because I don't know what it would have been made out of in real life. If it would have been like chocolate or...
This should be similar to the boat.
Okay, so it should be this kind of porous material, like this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like it's caramel. It's melted sugar.
Yeah,
and,
it's sugar.
And put in shape with the hands, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably a form. Okay, Sure, we
So
can do
I
that.
wanted to look for tree, the bonsai, you
Mhm.
know, especially this with the complicated number 2ECF162D
Yeah, I see it.
and so on. This is the tree with the two trunks. This is something I really like, and it has also this distortion. Yeah, this wrangled up.
Yeah,
How
you mean like the bark of
yeah,
this and like the roots that go in here. Yeah,
yeah,
to make it
and
look like fiber.
yeah, this should be recreated in sugar and
Okay.
it grow out of the sauce.
So the sugar material here would have been this should have been really easy because it's just glass with a lot of holes in it. So it would have been complicated geometry, probably with the subsurf. I didn't do this because I didn't know what it was supposed to be. So but we can start on it if you want, and you can see like the small details or there's bubbles inside of this. So if I did this, and you wanted to have really this kind of close up where you can see all the detailing, I would use a particle system with spheres inside the glass as well to create these.
Mhm.
The holes shouldn't be a problem. Just make the mesh, subdivide it a bunch of times, do checker select or random select, and then delete a few faces. Then use solidify modifier to give it like the thickness here. Doesn't need to be really thick. Slap another subsurf or multi-res on it, and then it should be good to go. So this shouldn't be a problem. This is really simple.
Yeah, but maybe I don't want so many holes. I just want the same material and have, you know when glass blazer, yeah,
Yep.
they have this glass and it's melted and then um, they pull on it
Yep. To
and then they
extrude it.
have
Yep.
yeah and so I think we can do the same with sugar. The sugar has it's hot and it's liquid and then when it's get hard then just pull it and squeeze it and you can get this kind of tree shape. I think maybe yeah.
Yeah, you can. So I'm just looking if this is like what people if people do like sugar sculptures, and they do. So this is something we would go for with this
Yeah.
probably. So it looks very much like colored glass or porcelain anyway. So this is a very simple material that would come out of it. Okay. So this is kind of my analysis. I mean, besides that, I think it just needs a lot more detail. The custard is not always entirely flat, right? But you already said that, so it should have varying thicknesses, layers. Like there's stuff that I think is missing here that should be spruce up the image somewhat and don't make it look as flat. Probably I went with bubbles because I found reference images where like the custard is kind of a bit porous and has a bit of bubbling going on even when it settles, and it doesn't ever get completely flat. So what I mean is, let me look this up. So this, and then you have something like this, right? And it becomes a bit bubbly when you whip it, and then
Yeah.
when you let it settle, it also has like this kind of consistency where it has like layers on top of each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what I did with this. Which one's gonna be representative? I think this one should be okay. So I didn't have infinite amounts of time to do this, but I think you get the general idea, right? So
Yeah.
I try to incorporate those observations, like stuff that's going up into the object from the liquid, the small bubbles, The caramel has varying thickness. I'm sure I can do this better if I have more time, but
Yeah.
the color isn't 100% for caramel. The porousness of this is, soft but visible and very small. The tops all are different, so they have different endings to them. Some curve upward, some curve downward, some are more straight, some are longer, some are a bit more round like this, or more perfect like these. And then in the custard as well, since this is like a food thing, so there's small particles in it because you add vanilla, pepper, or something like that, right?
Mhm.
So you add it's really just about adding small details to it. Okay, so what do you want to know from me? Is it clear how you would have created this?
No.
No.
No, I think this specific case just yeah, explain all the things that you wherever the round circle is. Yeah.
Okay, so mostly, kind of the trick, or not the trick, but rather what I use to create the variation is use sculpt. So this is mostly all sculpted. I just made a base mesh, which this was when it was like subdivided cylinder, or no, not a cylinder. I think I made it out of a cube, and then I used sculpt mode, right? And I used dynamic topology. Sorry, because it's was giving me higher resolution without my computer dying. So you know how to use sculpt and dynamic typology, or
No. I know that sculpting is a very big topic. I tried to jump in one day, but it was a little bit too much for the first day, and then I make a pause with the big wish to do this one day, but the day didn't come until now. But I see that more and more stuff, especially when it's about organic stuff, I don't came around it. So I definitely had to, yeah, spend more time learning this whole sculpting topic. Yeah.
yeah. So a few, just a quick overview over the tools that I've used. I used blob and inflate and deflate. Those are two brushes. They're standard with Blender, so you don't need to download anything for that. To create the small bubbles. So you just set your radius really small to something like this, and then the detail size in dynamic topology works like this. Let me turn on wireframe.
I know it makes a finer mesh only where you
Exactly. Yeah. So So that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
So to make this a bit more optimized, I kept the general shape of it relatively low resolution, but then where I wanted to have details, I used dynamic typology to kind of bring this stuff out. So you keep the detail size smaller or equal to your radius. That way you get like the detail better, right? Because if you set it too big, it'll create too large faces, and then you don't see anything working. If you set this to 2, you'll get very small details that you can make. And it's just this. It's just bumps. There's not really any deeper philosophy to this. And I just did this like I would in Photoshop. So place them randomly, and with the clay tool, I just created these meshes or this typology around the tops, these I don't know, small parts of meringue or whipped cream or whatever they were supposed to be ultimately, and just gave a bit of roughness. I mean, it's just drawing. It's pretty much really just drawing. It's
Okay.
not at 100%.
The things you do it with the mouse or with the tablet, with the graphic tablet?
I do it with the mouse. If I had something where I needed the precision, I have a tablet here. But for this, it's just giving it a general roughness. It doesn't need to be accurate at any point. So it's just, you know, if I do this or if I do that, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but why do I'm using the there's two tools that let you kind of draw. So there's sculpt and draw. Sculpt draw. So works like this. And there's clay. And clay works slightly differently to sculpt draw. It layers stuff on top of each other. You can see it gives it a more organic shape than the draw brush. So that's why I used the clay brush for this. When I created just one model of this whipped cream, and then in sculpt mode there's a brush called hook or snake hook, and what it does is you grab and then you pull, right?
Yeah.
Except that if you don't have dynamic typology enabled, it functions exactly like the grab tool, which isn't helpful. But if you enable dynamic typology, whoops, that one's not subdivided, maybe this one. So if you, here I already have dynamic typology enabled. It will create geometry when you drag. It almost draws new geometry. You see what I mean?
Okay, it's like extrusion. Yeah.
It almost works like extrusion. It's very fiddly depending on how big you set the detail size, because again, if you make this too big, it'll lose the radius of the brush and become very glitchy. But when you have it set at something lower than 4, it usually works pretty well to give it like this kind of finish. Because I only made one, I only make this. I think this one's unchanged, and then I just duplicated it and then played around with it. Just gave it like curved it this direction and curved it another direction, and then used maybe one of the sculpt tools at very, very low strength to kind of without dynamic topology to kind of give this a bit more like variation, you know, make it so they don't look all the same. But that's pretty much it. The Volcano, that one's very simple because Blender has already a generate Volcano function, if you didn't know.
No, I don't know about Volcano.
It's hidden, so not everyone. Also, it's relatively new, I think, because I didn't see it 2 versions back. But let me show you. So Shift C to recenter, and then you know of the ant landscape generator, right? Landscape.
I've heard about it, yeah.
Add mesh landscape. So you get this.
Okay.
But then you, in your tool settings, right, you have presets. Gotten kind of lost. Oh, the operator presets. Here, you just pick Volcano.
Oh.
And you get the Volcano. And then you just play with the settings on, you know, so you know you can just make it taller, and then you can use the seed setting to generate different types of Volcano. it'll just give you a random selection of shapes, and you just, just go through them and pick one. So all I did is like I took one of these, made it like if you press tab, it'll automatically make them into a mesh, and then cut off the bottom part because I don't want it to slope like this. I wanted it to be round at the bottom, to be kind of an organic kind of shape that's made out of sugar. So I deleted this, selected the bottom part, which we will never see, and with proportional editing, with sharp, I just kind of rounded it in and then filled it with F. So let's start with this material. And this material isn't particularly hard. I'll bring the node editor to the side. It's a noise texture. The scale is very high because we want to have very small like bumps on it. I think it's simple. So noise to bump. So you have the height and the strength, right? And then this goes into both the diffuse and the subsurface and the glossy. First, the two nodes are diffuse and subsurface because the material is porous, right? So it has like a solid structure that has holes in it and that needs the subsurface scattering. So that one's mixed at very, very low subsurface scattering because it's mostly solid and not like milk where it's mostly translucent. This is like kind of the base of it. And then this is mixed into one material that's porous and translucent. And then I mix it with like a coat of glossiness, right? So this comes on top. And it's also very, very low. We don't want it to like look like glass or something because it's still a mostly hard shell, and then it just goes to surface. There's nothing special about this at all. This is the same material for the Volcano. For the custard, it should also be relatively easy. Start with the noise texture, except this time it's a lot smaller even than before because the object's larger. Then have this go into a bump node, which will give it like this rough porousness here that I'm showing with the mouse. At the same time, out of the node comes a color ramp, which crushes the noise texture, the factor, into these tiny black speckles that I can use for making it look like, there's some particulates inside of the sauce. That's just mixed together with a mix RGB node. So search mix RGB, and with the right color. And then just as before, this goes into the diffuse and the glossy. And I've made this custard also transparent by a little bit. And then it goes into, again, the coat of the glossy comes on top because the custard in itself is like it's a suspension. It has particulate matter inside of it and it's all suspended in the water. That's why it's only glossy on the outside. And then the last trick pretty much is just a volume absorption, because this needs to be volumetric, this custard, because that's how it works in real life. Because it's thick, it scatters light differently when it's thinner and where it's thicker. It's lighter where it's thinner. It doesn't need to be much. That's why the volume absorption isn't very high. But if it gets to like a very thin point, it will become more transparent. You get what I mean? Or did I lose you? Okay. And that's pretty much it.
Can I maybe in short explain the volumetric absorption? I've heard about it. I've experimented with it, but I think I
Sure.
don't know really the key.
I think it's best if I explain it on the example of the caramel, because it is the same material except different colors, right? And I specifically made like a prototype. I think it's here because I wasn't sure which way to go with this. So this is the one I went with in the end. So volumetric absorption works like this. You have three material outputs in Blender: surface, volume, and displacement.
Yeah.
Surface gives you the ray scattering that hits a material like an object, and then you get some kind of color information out of it or glossy information out of it. With volume, it actually calculates how thick a mesh is, so it goes with the rays all the way through this material. It takes geometry into account and then gives you that information, and you can do stuff with it. So you have two nodes that work with it: volume absorption and volume scatter. Volume scattering is the scattering of light within a gas. That's how I think of it. It's not a physically accurate explanation that I'm giving you, but that's how it works in Blender. So if you put the density of any material, if I unplug the surface material from this, this is kind of fuzzy, right? Because it just tells how thick things are supposed to be. And if I crank this up high enough, like to something ridiculous like 10,000, it almost becomes solid, because I'm telling it absorbs all light that comes into it. And so the material is just really based on that, to have a color with a color. The color ramp kind of just says the dark parts are gonna be this color and the light parts are gonna be this color. So the thinner parts where the light transmits less are gonna be this color, and where it is more, it's gonna be this color. So that's all it does. And then density higher, and then the surface is essentially almost just glass. It's glossy and transparent, because I didn't want the glass shader also has an index of refraction. So you have things distorted behind it, and that's not how the caramel works. It doesn't work like glass and distorts stuff behind it, and it's not really important.
Yeah. And the number you have now for the volume absorption,
Yeah.
This is you just by trying out, or this is something like the
Yeah, the index of refraction. No.
You have, for the index of refraction, you have a list in the internet, and you can say, okay,
yeah, a list.
This. So
Yep.
where have you this?
Trial and error. There's no set number, because the volume absorption in Blender is largely made for gases anyway. So it's supposed to be used for things like steam, clouds, smoke, right? So if you do the smoke simulation, you want to have the volume absorption there. But to make realistic liquids, and I found this to be true most of the time, you want to have some kind of volume absorption in it. Colored glass, also, if you just use the glass node and set it like to an orangey color, that's also not how light is transmitted through a solid piece of glass, because it's also thicker in places and absorbs more light, and then it's darker there. So you need to use the volume absorption to achieve that effect, even though it's not really built for it. So for the caramel, that's pretty much what I used. It's just volume absorption to make it darker where it's thick and lighter where it's not. And then on top of it is glass with a very small amount of bump. that's very fine to make it kind of rough. It also has these particular things in it, and when it kind of solidifies, I had a good picture somewhere. Yeah, here. View image and zoom in. You can see like it's slightly rough on the outside when it cools down. So when it's no longer hot, it gets like a thin skin on it. It's no longer just a liquid that reflects like glass. So that's all there is to say. And that's all the materials. There's only 3 materials here. I mean, besides the porcelain, but the porcelain, you know, it's the most standard porcelain material you can imagine. It's just a glossy and a diffuse put together with a Fresnel. I used layer weight because it sometimes gives a little bit more control, but it doesn't really matter if you use Fresnel, or I don't even know how it's properly pronounced, Fresnel, because it's French.
Yeah.
So that's it. Do you need more information on this? Do you want to know?
The way you put the caramel sauce is with liquid animation, or?
No. I did it very simply. So I had this base shape from the Volcano, and then I made a box that I subdivided with Subsurf, so it created like something that's sticking out of it. And then I did a boolean to delete everything that's inside of the Volcano to just have this surface, right? Just have this. And then what I did is sculpt it, put it into shape.
Okay. I think Blender Guru has something on this donut tutorial for the sauce on the donut, right? I think it was made with liquid. Anyway.
Maybe. I think that using the fluid simulation on this would be overkill, especially since you would need a very high mesh resolution for the simulation. Would probably take forever to render.
Yeah. This is more structured, like as the donut.
So I try whenever I work, I try to find kind of the fastest way to create an acceptable solution. That's why I like simulations. I really do, and I like procedural materials. But if they're not working, they're just not working. For the custard, I have this is Soße 2, and I had Soße 1, which is a ridiculous try of replicating these bubbles I sculpted onto it with a procedural material, with like 3 node groups that go into another node group, and it almost works. It almost works, but I'd needed at least another 3 or 4 hours to tweak this material to make it look good, because it was too regular. And I just decided this is gonna take too long, and I just sculpted it, because it's not efficient to work, you know, to try and get this procedural material if you don't need it, and you don't in this case.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else you would like me to explain?
Maybe the light setup.
The light setup is really as well super simple. So I have an it's not actually an HDR. It's just a 360 image. Turn this off. That you can get free from somewhere. It's nice because it has 2 sources of light. So it has one here, and then it has another window here that creates like 2-way. And then I put 2 area lights in between. So if you look at it from the top, there's one here and one here. One slightly angled because I wanted the reflection of the custard to come out. So I wanted the bumps to be visible. If I make everything flat, I don't see the texture of this raised sauce interacting with the cream or the meringue here. The one stronger light is coming from here, and then I have a fill light from the left, and then the HDR is really just there, or the 360 image is only just there to give additional reflections that are realistic and not just everything being black or white. And then the only thing I additionally did, so if you can see, like when it comes to composition, I always use the composition guides, and I think you should too. For this particular piece, even though I am not a proponent of a center composition, I did it. So I placed the subject directly in the middle, but the golden triangle A gave me a nice line that intersects it. So I can put it on this axis, and I move the camera exactly into a isometric view, and then set it to orthographic, so it's all lined up on this line.
But the question is, when you look at the reference with where you see the close-up with the crunchy nut stuff, how would you achieve this easily? I think the only way is to model something like this, to model different pieces of that, and have a particle system with a random selection of the objects, and just playing around.
I'm thinking if a particle system would really be good for this. It might be if you used... I'm trying to figure out how you could place this. I think on a plane, and then the pieces shouldn't have any rotation, because you can see on this, they're mostly layered on top of each other. They're not really randomly sticking together. They create, like, here's a layer, here's another layer, here's another layer. So they stick together on their flat sides. I'm afraid that if we use the particle system too much, they'll go too crazy, and they'll kind of look like cereal instead of almond flakes or nut flakes, or whatever you want to call it. I think if we wanted to recreate this, these kind of flakes, I would honestly probably model most of these by hand. Like, this shouldn't be too hard, because it's largely like very simple shapes. So they're like ovals with a bit of thickness, so they shouldn't be hard to do. And then do a bunch of them and stick them together in differing ways, and the rest is material. But yeah, I think that's it from me. Do you want us to continue with the spider?
No,
Or
I think
no?
it would be too much. There was a lot of information that I can now think of. It's good. I think we should end here. Then okay. The information would be overwritten immediately. Yeah, good.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Fine.
Thanks.
Okay, ciao.